All right, let's jump right into this explainer. We're not just looking at a few fluctuating market indicators today. We are decoding the systemic causality behind literally one of the most profound economic shifts in modern history. We're looking at China's massive transition from an era of hyperinvestment to an era that is hyper-focused on economic security. To really wrap our heads around this macro-level friction, we have to start small. There's this localized human-scale tension called involution, or neijuan. It's such a perfect way to visualize the sheer friction of producing things without having buyers. Imagine a factory floor just humming, workers competing fiercely, and goods just piling up in warehouses, all without the matching consumer demand. It's basically a state of mindless production. And this localized exhaustion, it's the clearest symptom of a much larger systemic issue.
Because the exhaustion of an entire era is undeniable at this point. Look, the old growth formula was basically a miracle, right? By funneling massive domestic savings in infrastructure, manufacturing, and real estate, this investment-led strategy lifted 800 million people out of extreme poverty since 1978. But here's the thing, that formula has absolutely hit a mathematical wall. Just notice the plummet in total factor productivity, or TFP. It's a core measure of economic efficiency. Before the global financial crisis, TFP growth averaged a really robust 2.8%. Today, it has tanked to just 0.7%. The old engines simply cannot pull the weight anymore.
Which brings us to Section 1, the mid-air engine swap.
The research literally calls this an unprecedented mid-air engine swap. And honestly, the sheer difficulty of this task is wild. You've got this debt-fueled investment-heavy model, the old engine, and it's losing altitude fast. At the exact same time, the state is attempting to bolt on a brand new, self-reliant, high-tech, and consumption-driven engine. And they have to do this while somehow keeping the plane flying. No big deal, right?
Let's dig into Section 2 to see exactly why that old engine is failing, anatomy of mindless production and the savings trap.
Just look at the staggering imbalance here. Nearly half, we're talking 47% of all household wealth in China is locked up in real estate. For years, the property sector made up an astonishing 30% of the entire GDP. But that massive housing bubble burst in 2021. And the experts across all our sources are in total consensus on one thing. The property sector is dead as a growth engine. The hemorrhaging we're seeing is a multi-year drag. And because so much personal wealth is trapped inside it, the ripple effects are severe.
So, because of this massive wealth trap, we get this really vicious cause and effect loop. First off, falling property values burst the bubble. Then, boom, you get a psychological and financial negative wealth effect. When people see their net worth tanking, they get spooked. And third, risk-averse citizens completely stop spending and start hoarding cash. That right there is the deflationary savings trap. And when consumer spending stops, corporate profits shrink, which discourages investment, which drives prices down even further. This is exactly why real GDP is growing faster than nominal GDP right now, which is the textbook definition of deflation.
The systemic pressure points are flashing red across the board. Public debt is hovering right around 100% of GDP, which seriously handcuffs the government from just printing a massive stimulus check. Households are squirreling away over 31% of their disposable income. It's a precautionary hoarding response to a pretty weak social safety net. Youth unemployment is sitting at 17.7%, highlighting a really painful mismatch between highly educated graduates and a stalling service sector. Meanwhile, industrial profits are squeezed, and private credit demand is softening even with lower interest rates. Looking at these numbers, it's no wonder experts are so sharply divided. Some look at the 4 Ds, deflation, debt, demographics, and decoupling, and see an insurmountable collapse. But others argue that the state's monopoly power over currency and internal debt ensures long-term resilience.
And just to add one more layer to this whole domestic freeze, consider this number, 7.4%. That is the year-over-year drop in local land lease revenues. See, for years, local governments funded themselves by leasing land to developers. With the property crash, that revenue has totally dried up. So right when citizens need a safety net the most, local governments are being forced to slash vital infrastructure spending and tighten up social services.
With domestic demand essentially paralyzed, we have to zoom out for Section 3, the global export flood.
The mercantilist squeeze here is incredibly stark. China accounts for a massive 35% of all global manufacturing production, but its share of global consumption, it's just a fraction of that. When a country makes vastly more than its own people can actually buy, well, it has to export its way out of domestic stagnation.
Let's look at how this creates a massive global spillover. Because domestic buyers are basically sidelined, hitting the state's 5% economic growth target means generating a staggering $1 trillion trade surplus. To keep the factory lights on and people employed, the system just floods the zone with supply. The result? Export prices plummet by 30%. And this isn't just an internal metric, it's a global shockwave. International competitors are suddenly forced to either slash their own prices to the absolute bone or just exit the market entirely. That local involution we talked about at the start, it's now a global flood.
So, how on earth does a nation pivot out of this? That brings us to our final synthesis, Section 4, the new economic security.
The first major hurdle, obviously, is figuring out how to unlock consumer spending. It's actually fascinating to look at the intense debate in the research over stimulus. On one side, you have voices pushing for direct cash handouts, basically empowering the public to dare to consume. But opponents hit back, arguing that because the public is so risk-averse right now, they'll simply hoard any one-time cash payments. Instead, they argue for deep, structural improvements to the social safety net. The logic is simple. If people aren't terrified of going bankrupt from an illness or old age, they won't feel the need to save 31% of their income.
So what's the actual roadmap out of this property trap? The state's forward-looking strategy leans really heavily on a few key structural shifts. First, pivoting from a cheap labor dividend to a talent dividend. The shrinking youth workforce actually has an average of 7.8 more years of education than the retiring workers, which perfectly primes them for automation in high-tech sectors. Second, financial rebalancing, following World Bank advice to diversify household wealth away from housing and into private pensions. Third, creating a unified national market. This means destroying local protectionism between provinces so resources can flow organically to where they are actually needed. And finally, scaling up the new three: electric vehicles, lithium batteries, and solar panels. These sectors are incredibly vibrant and highly advanced.
But let's be real, the data makes one thing crystal clear. The new three are just way too small right now to fill the massive hole left by a real estate sector that used to be 30% of the economy. Plus, there are severe systemic hurdles remaining. Externally, you've got geopolitical containment, where U.S. export controls on advanced AI and semiconductors are acting as a hard barrier to high-quality growth. Internally, local governments are wrestling with soft budget constraints, meaning they artificially prop up failing, loss-making factories just to maintain local employment. This creates zombie companies that just perpetuate the whole overcapacity cycle.
Ultimately, the absolute core takeaway from all this research is that China's economic future isn't about guaranteeing high-speed growth anymore. That era, the one fueled by endless concrete and debt, it's over. The new era is entirely about managing a profound structural deceleration without crashing the plane. As they perform this mid-air engine swap, navigating a collapsing property sector, an aging demographic, and an urgent pivot to high-tech economic security, it leaves us with one massive, critical question. How will the global trade order actually absorb the shockwaves of this transition? It's a systemic shift that is, without a doubt, going to define the entire next decade of global economics.